Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So 5 days after declaring live on this programme that she would seek a warrant for immediate access to Cambridge Analytica, the Information Commissioner is still waiting. The High Court has still not decided whether to grant access to Elizabeth Denham's investigators. She has said that she believes that data harvested from millions of Facebook users is still being held by the controversial political strategy firm. Andy Davis has been in court this afternoon. Andy, what's happening?
Well, would you believe it? They are still arguing over this warrant. They've been arguing in court since 3 o'clock. I've just come from the High Court. They haven't had a break, and we don't know when it's going to end. And this isn't just a case of a judge signing off a warrant. Think of it more like a sort of a festival of legal argument. And it hasn't just been going on today. It hasn't just been going on since the warrant was applied for earlier this week. This goes all the way back to the 7th of March, we learned today, when the Information Commissioner said she wanted to get access to Cambridge Analytica's records. So it's been tortuous in the extreme. It's ended up in court. Cambridge Analytica have brought in 2 QCs today, so they are fighting it tooth and nail at some cost. But what we have learned involves this data. The data at the centre of this whole storm, the Facebook data, the 50 million profiles, supposedly deleted, passed to Cambridge Analytica back in 2014, supposedly deleted. But now the Information Commissioner has said that she has grounds to suspect that it's still on the servers of Cambridge Analytica here.
And what are those grounds?
Inconsistency. She said that Alexander Nix, who was he's now the suspended chief exec of Cambridge Analytica, apparently he told Facebook that that data had been deleted as early as January 2016. He said that some time ago. But today, we learned in court that apparently lawyers for Cambridge Analytica have said that actually that data was deleted not then, but in April 2017. And also, it was claimed today that Chris Wiley, the whistleblower in this whole case, went to the Information Commissioner in February this year and gave them a statement. And he gave them the names that were attributed to that data, names like Kogan data, like Ocean data. And the Information Commissioner has also got a copy of the current data sets owned by Cambridge Analytica. And they've cross-referenced what Wiley told them with this spreadsheet, and they think there are similarities. What do Cambridge Analytica say? Basically, it's ridiculous. They say this theory is demonstrably wrong. The data has been deleted. They've said that repeatedly. And what possible motive could they have for retaining it, is what they said to the court today. So they are resisting this long and hard, right up to this very point now.
And what happens next?
I don't know. I mean, the judge was asking earlier about how long this would take for the submissions to be given. And then he said, well, I want to make a decision tonight. We'll stay open. And as I left the court, the whole court had shut down, but they're trying to thrash this out. And I've just got a message from someone in court who thinks it's not going to be possible for them to make a decision on this. So I don't know when this ends.
Well, Andy, is this sort of normal for it to go on into the night?
I don't think it's normal for them to be in this position anyway. So, I mean, we wait and see what happens, because if they do grant, let's say they do grant a warrant tonight, then there's a whole question of...
Andy, let me just interrupt you, because it's just broken. A judge sitting at the High Court, according to the Press Association, has granted an application by the Information Commissioner's Office for a warrant to search the London offices of Cambridge Analytica. So at last, she's got the warrant she wanted.
Right.
So will she get in tonight, is the question.
Well, that's very interesting. I think almost certainly not tonight, unless the Information Commissioner can get everyone together and get in here immediately. Maybe they will. I mean, I know they want to. They're very keen to get in as soon as they can. But speaking to them earlier this week, there's a logistical issue. They have to get, when they get in here, they have to come in a reasonable way. So if people have gone home for the night, is it reasonable for the Cambridge Analytica staff to come back here? We'll see, because when they come into this office, they're going to have to bring in a significant team, probably up to a dozen people. And that's not just a team of investigators. It might be some people to secure the premises. It would also include, I'm told, an independent lawyer, because if Cambridge Analytica suddenly say, hang on, you can't touch those documents because they are legally privileged, then they have to have an arbitration service there and then. So they've got an independent lawyer will be in there, I understand, and will look at some of that contentious material or disputed material and say, yes, you can have it, or no, you can't.
OK, Andy, we'll come back to you later if there are developments or if anybody arrives at those offices to look at the computers. But for now, thank you very much.
Well, nowhere is the fallout of the data scandal felt more keenly than at Facebook headquarters. Mark Zuckerberg is due to speak to staff in California about his firm's involvement. The social media giant has seen billions wiped from its value after it emerged the personal details of up to 50 million users were used by Cambridge Analytica in a bid to influence elections around the world. Facebook is also facing a public backlash with a growing campaign urging users to delete their accounts. Well, our business editor Siobhan Kennedy is outside Facebook's HQ near San Francisco. Siobhan, what's he going to say?
Well, Kathy, the sprawling estate over the freeway behind me there is home to 17,000 Facebook employees, including the boss, Mark Zuckerberg. But I can tell you, it's very evident that Facebook takes its own privacy much more seriously than it took the privacy of its users in the past. Now, we took a drive round the campus over there this morning, and very quickly we were hit upon by at least a dozen security staff on foot, on bicycles, in cars. We were very quickly removed from the campus. Yet when we tried this week to bid for the company, to bid for an interview, this is a company, remember, that's talking all about transparency and openness, they have declined our request, despite the fact I'm standing right here, right now, outside their gate. But the boss, Mark Zuckerberg, will be speaking today to staff at that town hall meeting you mentioned, where he will try, Kathy, to make amends for what has been really the ugliest week in his company's 14-year history. The golden glow of sunrise over Silicon Valley and Facebook Town across the San Francisco Bay. But the shine has come off the golden child of social media this week like never before. 50 million user profiles harvested, potentially for political gain. $50 billion now wiped off Facebook's value as a result. And that's got Facebook's favoured employees rattled, arriving at work this morning to finally hear from their boss, Mark Zuckerberg, as to how they got into this mess.
You know, I regret that we didn't do it at the time, and I think we got that wrong, and we're committed to getting that right going forward.
He'd already tried to douse those flames publicly on Wednesday when he was finally forced to speak. But his mea culpa didn't seem to do the trick, leaving Sheryl Sandberg, his second in command, to continue the damage limitation.
This was a huge breach of trust. People come to Facebook every day, and they depend upon us to protect their data. And I am so sorry that we let so many people down. We spent the last few days trying to get to the bottom of what happened. Cambridge Analytica never should have had this data. They told us they deleted it, but it is our mistake that we did not verify that.
In Palo Alto's main drag last night, the social media set was socializing, and those who could or would speak seemed not to have swallowed the Facebook Kool-Aid.
Were you surprised by the revelation that all this data was being siphoned off?
No, not at all. Not at all surprised. I've had several people on Twitter that have been kind of leading me in the right direction as far as learning what Cambridge Analytica and their leadership and Facebook has been doing. So I actually deleted my Facebook account about 8 months ago.
Were you weren't surprised?
Wow, I'm on
by that?
Facebook. I'm probably screwed.
Do you think that the CEO, did Mark Zuckerberg handle it well? Did Sheryl Sandberg?
I saw his message where he's apologizing for it. I think he should come out with a little bit more interviews and come out and talk about it more.
Of course, there's nothing new about the Facebook row over data privacy, but the misuse of data by Cambridge Analytica, which it has denied, and the link to President Trump has really struck a nerve. Donald Trump's former strategist and a co-founder of Cambridge Analytica yesterday denied he knew anything, but he had this to say about Facebook.
My point is, you struck out on Russia. Yeah. And now you've got to go to Cambridge Analytica. That's what won it for you. Here's what won it for you. Here's what won it for Trump: economic nationalism and talking in a plain voice to the American people.
Okay.
From his Bayside view on Facebook campus, Mr. Zuckerberg will no doubt be reflecting on the price of privacy and a scandal that's cost the firm dear, not just in dollars, but in trust too. Well, a week is a very long time in this supercharged world of social media, but this does appear to be a story that isn't going away anytime soon for Facebook. The share price is still dropping a week later, and Mr. Zuckerberg faces a grilling in front of an influential committee of senators. But more worrying, perhaps, for the company is this groundswell that appears to be growing around that hashtag delete Facebook. The latest high-profile person to put his name to that campaign is the billionaire owner of SpaceX, Elon Musk. But if others follow suit, if that hashtag does gain traction, then things for this social media giant behind me here in Silicon Valley could get very difficult indeed.
Thanks, Siobhan. Now, the internet company Mozilla, best known for its Firefox web browser, has become the first internet giant to suspend its advertising on Facebook following the Cambridge Analytica scandal. They've said that when Facebook takes stronger action on sharing customers' data, specifically strengthening its default privacy settings for apps, they'll consider returning. Well, earlier I spoke to the executive chairwoman, Mitchell Baker, and I asked her why they decided to hit pause on their Facebook spend.
We decided to pause our advertising on Facebook because of the collective weight of the data questions and the lack of understanding of what's happening and the inability to figure out what's actually happening with all that consumer data.
How much of it came as a surprise to you?
These latest revelations were indeed a surprise. We didn't expect that. We have been talking about the dangers of data and the dangers of the amount and kinds of data that the big platforms collect for a number of years. And so we've been a little bit of the voice in the wilderness. So we were not surprised that there are problems. We were surprised at the scale and scope of this one and the uses to which the data was put.
I mean, Zuckerberg has apologized, sort of, and said that he's going to have a big audit of everything. Why is that not good enough for you?
Well, we'll see. It may be, but right now it's hard to know what's actually happening with that data. We would like consumers to be able to know that. And so an audit is good. That means I assume that Facebook will know what's happening to the data. But the next question is, how does that help consumers? And how do we know that it's helping us? And are we going to continue to rely on internal processes, or is there increased transparency and clarity about what uses our data is being put to?
What is your fear about what has happened to this data and how it's been used? I mean, do you fear that democracy has been hacked in some way?
We feel that the social structure is being hacked, and also that individual consumers and citizens are being hacked. You know, with all that data, it turns out you can understand a human being in some ways better than that person understands themselves. And with that information, it's easy to manipulate human beings. And that is an issue across all sorts of behavior. Here we see it used in voting behavior, but it's also used in shopping and buying and consuming habits.
Do you gather data at Mozilla?
We gather a limited form of data known as telemetry, which is information on the operation of the product. But we don't gather personal data about you, and the information that we have, we try and separate out as much of anything that would identify you as possible. And we don't sell it, we don't give it to anybody else, we don't use it to target ads. We don't say that data should never be collected or that it can never be used. We say that consumers must be respected and treated well in that process. And we know that it's a very complex process at Facebook, since ads based on consumer data is the business model.
Are you starting to think about deleting Facebook?
I like to reflect and I like to have time for my own thoughts, so I'm not naturally inclined to share everything. So that's a personal trait that you know, may be in the minority. Secondly, it is pretty personal, and I don't actually, I'm not drawn to share that much personal information in this business model at all.
Thank you very much indeed. That's great.
Well, the data harvesting began after Cambridge University professor Alexander Kogan developed an app to conduct personality tests of Facebook users. I spoke earlier to The Guardian columnist Poppy Noor, who was a psychology student at the university in 2011. She worked on developing a personality test that Mr. Kogan then reproduced before passing the data to scandal-hit political strategist Cambridge Analytica.
What they were doing at Cambridge University was they did a personality quiz, and that gave you information back about their exact traits. And then you use information, they hand over information from their Facebook profiles, and you look at those two things in conjunction.
So it was a different personality quiz to the one that Kogan came up with?
Yes, Kogan approached Cambridge University. He worked in the psychometric centre. He approached the academics who were using that data and said, can I pay you for it? Can I collaborate with you on it? They said no both times, and then he developed his own.
Give us a sense of the scale of the data that you were accessing.
When I was working on the My Personality quiz, 4.5 million users had taken the quiz, and we had access to their information. By the time it closed, it was 7.5 million. So if you think about the kind of validity that gives you in research, how accurately that can help you to make predictions, it's huge.
So the data that you were using came from a personality quiz. What was it? How revealing was it?
So essentially what this information does is it assumes that all people, broadly speaking, can be summarised by 5 key traits. They are openness or lack thereof, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness and neuroticism. And when you give people a personality test based on those 5 traits, you get loads of information about all of the small things that make up those broader traits. So how hardworking is that person? How ambitious are they? How organised are they? How emotionally stable are they? So that information, in conjunction with Facebook data like what your political preferences are or what things you like on Facebook, is an incredibly powerful way to look at correlations.
I mean, it sounds quite nebulous, that, and in a sense, therefore quite harmless. How was it actually much more sort of granular than that?
You know, just as an example, there was a You Are What You Like application that was also built out of this data, and that tells you essentially, you know, you take something like Smirnoff vodka or BMWs and you look at the average personality profile of people that like those things, and they will tell you, you know, exactly what that person is like. So I suppose the way that ends up being data that might influence an election is because you know what kind of messaging to send to an African-American person who normally votes Democrat from a particular area that might convince them not to go out and vote that day. Whether it's advertising or whether it's something like a political campaign, once you know what that person is like, you can tailor your message so it's that much more effective so that it convinces them to do what you want them to do.
When Alexander Kogan talked about the fact that the accuracy of the data had been exaggerated, that I think he said that it was 6 times more likely that they'd get everything wrong about a person as to get everything right about a person. Do you believe that statement, or do you think actually the data was pretty accurate?
Research has shown that using people's personality information and their Facebook information can help you to predict their personality better than their partner can, better than their friends can.
Better than their partner can?
You go into somebody's bedroom and, you know, by and large, people can predict what that person is like without knowing them. The difference with data is that you can put all of that information into a spreadsheet and then you can run correlations on that data. You know, you can run it through a statistical modelling tool which will tell you more things than if you just walked into somebody's bedroom. So it's hugely powerful.
Well, there is no suggestion of any impropriety from Cambridge University, who used it for legitimate academic purposes.
Now on to other news, and 18 officials working for the Information Commissioner have tonight started searching the central London premises of the firm Cambridge Analytica. They went in after a search warrant was granted by a High Court judge. Cambridge Analytica has been at the centre of claims about the alleged misuse of personal data from social media. Of course, our reporter Ivor Bennett is there. And Ivor, take us through what's been happening there tonight.
Well, Julie, the investigators have been here for just over 2 hours now, going through the servers of Cambridge Analytica here at their offices in central London. It's taken them a long time to get to this point. Of course, the Information Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham, first said she'd be seeking a search warrant back on Monday night. She finally got that earlier this evening when it was granted by the High Court, and once that happened she wasted no time whatsoever, sending over 18 investigators to search the premises just an hour later. They're here to investigate the claims that the company, Cambridge Analytica, has illegally harvested the data of millions of Facebook users without their consent for use in political campaigns. The company denies any wrongdoing, and earlier in court today they had offered to hand over evidence to the ICO on Monday. The data watchdog said that wasn't good enough. They wanted to see inside here for themselves. They've now got that chance. What they find, well, that's another question.
Ivor, thank you very much.
Now, tonight, Cambridge Analytica is being searched by 18 enforcement officers working for the Information Commissioner, following this week's allegations that CA used people's data to help political campaigns without their consent. But it may be over the pond that the largest reverberations are felt, namely by Facebook, whose share price tumbled in the wake of the revelations and whose chief executive, Mark Zuckerberg, now finds himself invited to appear in front of lawmakers in the US. So are issues of privacy, tax avoidance and monopolistic behaviour about to create a perfect storm for the tech giants? We've uploaded our technology editor, David Grossman, to Silicon Valley to find out.
California doesn't look nearly so lovely in the rain. Just as the people who work in Silicon Valley aren't used to dealing with the wet, well, the big tech companies aren't used to a deluge of bad publicity. They normally bask in the warm glow of the world's approval. Well, not anymore.
You know, for the longest time, people in Silicon Valley have been looked at as, heroes for technology, moving the world forward, etc. And all of a sudden, people are starting to feel a distaste in their mouth that's typically been reserved for spaces like, Washington, D.C. politics or even Wall Street. And that's a pretty new shift in the popular mindset, and something that I don't think a lot of tech founders have ever expected.
The huge thumbs up here at Facebook's headquarters at Menlo Park portrays the positive image that the tech companies work so hard to create. The events of the last few weeks has put a huge dent in that, and in that core founding principle of Silicon Valley, that technology is going to make the world a better place.
I think for many parts of the American body politic, Trump is seen as an existential threat to American democracy, and they kind of see Zuck as the guy who put him there.
Really?
Yeah, oh, I think so, yeah. And, and they're not completely wrong.
And that's not how Zuck, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, wants to be remembered. The man who donated $75 million to this San Francisco hospital wants Facebook's moral capital to be every bit as impressive as his bank balance. But the Cambridge Analytica scandal is eating his reputation. Om Malik was one of San Francisco's original tech bloggers. He's now a tech investor. He says the scandal is a signal that the Valley has to change its ways.
People in Silicon Valley have not woken up to their own responsibilities. We are now the mainstream. We are not the outsiders. We are the people. And I think people in the Valley still did not understand that we have the responsibility of figuring out what the impact of our technology efforts is on real people.
Nobody in Silicon Valley that I've met was surprised at what was done. Indeed, the Cambridge Analytica story originally broke in 2015, but that, of course, was before the results of the US election.
San Francisco and Silicon Valley are the most Democrat-supporting parts of California, and California is the most Democrat-supporting state in the Union. The idea that technologies developed here may have helped give Donald Trump the White House, well, it's that fact that's causing this profound existential soul-searching.
Antonio Garcia Martinez is a former product manager at Facebook. He left in 2013.
the technologies we're talking about in the case of Trump and the Cambridge story are the exact same technologies that you know, Amazon or Zappos or pick your large retailer has been using to sell you, you know, shoes or soap or consumer goods for years now, right? But now they're being used to sell you Trump and Brexit and, you know, whatever else. And I think people's reaction to that, when that's the product being sold, is very, very different than just a consumer good. Suddenly their tolerance for that sort of tracking and like, well, we got to pay for the internet somehow, so I'll put up with ads, that tolerance kind of goes away when you've got Trump in power.
One of Silicon Valley's undoubted strengths is that you have all the big players in one place, bouncing ideas off each other. But is that too why things have gone wrong? I've arranged to talk to a former senior executive at the dating app Tinder, who left to start a new venture well away from Silicon Valley.
So tell me, why did you leave Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Silicon Valley is a special place in terms of the ecosystem that allows people to take risks and do big things. But even for me as an entrepreneur, when you start to spend time there every day, people are, you know, echoing the same sentiments of the biggest opportunity right now is blockchain or Bitcoin or AI. You just lose sight of what the real issues people are facing are and the real consequences of what we're doing, because everybody around you is part of that same bubble.
If you have a high-paying tech job that the robots aren't about to automate away, and you can afford to live in a place like Palo Alto, well, the world probably looks a pretty fantastic place.
If, on the other hand, you live in a town thousands of miles from here, where the local newspaper's closed because it couldn't sell any advertising, the cab firm's gone bust because of Uber, the flat above you's been turned into Party Central by Airbnb, and you're worried that your democracy is being subverted by fake news, well, the world, and the tech world, probably looks very different.
There's one sort of tragic flaw in the Silicon Valley, you know, techno-optimists sort of mind, right? And, you know, I suffer from it myself, by the way. I'm not talking about, you know, them and not me, right? I was the same way. Was always assuming the best of any technology. A, any technology is inevitable, right? So we're going to create it because someone's going to create it anyhow. And then two, you know, whatever beautiful visions we have of this future are always necessarily good. And if there's any downside, it's either, you know, transitory in some way or minor in the scheme of things and totally worth it. I think they have a hard time imagining the downsides of what they're doing.
Now awash with cash, the big tech companies are building fabulous new headquarters in Silicon Valley. This is Apple's. It's like a spaceship ready to carry humanity into the future. What's changing, perhaps, is that the techies now realize they need to think and talk more about where it is exactly they want to take us all.
David Grossman there. Well, let's discuss the issues facing the tech sector and Facebook. And with us, we have Professor Nick Bostrom, Director of the Oxford Future of Humanity Institute, and Professor Karen Young, who is Professor of Law and Computer Science at the University of Birmingham. Karen, let's start with you. Is what we've seen in the last week a hiccup in the unstoppable march of these firms, or is it something more serious than that, do you think?
Well, it's a little early to tell. My own view is that it's quite an important moment insofar as we've seen recently a so-called backlash against the big tech firms and a rising public anxiety about the downsides of some of these incredibly helpful technologies. And I think this entire set of events concerning Cambridge Analytica and its effect on the election results is making people really wake up and think about what exactly is going on here, and is this something that we actually want to embrace wholeheartedly, or do we need to do something to try and mitigate against the potential risks associated with this vast collection of our personal data?
I mean, look, there are some bigger issues and philosophies underpinning this, aren't there? I mean, the philosophies of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, radical transparency. Is that unstoppable, do you think? Or would you agree with Karen that actually this has now hit a serious obstacle?
I think probably transparency in the physical realm looks pretty unstoppable. The cameras are getting cheaper, it's easier to collect more and more data. Transparency in the digital domain, I think, is still up for grabs, because on the one hand you do have more and more data collected and better means to analyze it, but you also have cryptography that is becoming more deployed, and so it's an open question which of those will win out.
What does this idea of radical transparency mean? I mean, just for viewers who haven't heard it before, and how important is it as a philosophy underpinning some of these big tech businesses?
Well, you can think of an extreme scenario where, say, everything that we do and say is recorded and analyzable and available to everybody. You could imagine a completely transparent society. And I think there's a number of important...
No privacy at all?
Yeah, just for the sake of analytic clarity. It's easier to analyze the extreme, and then you can kind of think about compromises. So there's a bunch of big negatives and the big positives on that. Now, to me, the biggest considerations, both for and against, are slightly different than what most people will immediately think of. So you think of privacy, we don't want pictures of ourselves when they're in the shower. And so, on the other hand, there's a terrorist attack that might blow up a bus. We need to have law enforcement looking at that. To me, the really important issues long-term, if we're thinking about this, are, on the one hand, the possibility of totalitarian systems benefiting from being able to surveil everybody and detect dissidents and networks of rebellion and so forth. And on the plus side, if there are powerful new technologies, maybe something is discovered in biotech that just makes it very easy for an individual to destroy the world, right? In that scenario, how do you prevent the world from being destroyed? And it might be that the only way would be to keep track of what everybody is doing at every point in time.
Now, Karen, you mentioned people's unease about what was going on in the elections, but clearly Nick's going a whole lot further in terms of following this radical transparency concept to its logical conclusions. I mean, is he right, do you think? Is that where we're headed, or is the kind of disquiet that you've mentioned going to put a brake on this in some sense?
Well, one thing I know from thinking about the governance of emerging technology is that one can never predict where it's going to go. There are so many contingencies that I'm not going to do something unrewarding and try and imagine where we will be in 50 to 100 years' time. But I do think that there is a possibility for us to intervene and think collectively as a society about what kind of digital society do we want to live in. And I don't accept this technological determinist view that the technology just has a momentum of its own and we are but passive pawns in that particular show.
Well, it's handy if you're trying to build a massive business.
It certainly is, but I do actually think that we can act collectively and think carefully and deliberate meaningfully about what matters to us in terms of a digital environment and a digital world, and impose appropriate constraints upon what is done with our personal data and where we think the boundaries ought to be.
Is that right? I mean, do you agree, or do you think effectively the genie's out the bottle in terms of sharing data, connectivity?
I mean, it looks like we are moving more and more into a sharing world. Now, I think some technologies are more or less deterministically just going to be rolled out. I think actually with these social networks, there is a number of possible outcomes, because there might be different equilibria where, you know, either it gets controls, only certain people have access to all of this data, let's say law enforcement agencies and maybe the companies themselves. Or in another social equilibrium, maybe we move to a system where everybody can see everything that everybody's doing.
Huge issues, but I'm afraid we don't have time to go further with them, but thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
I've been getting away with it all.